For 45 years, I transformed a modest starter house into a cherished neighborhood landmark with my own hands, until my nephew and his wife decided I was too frail to live independently and tried to sell my property while I was recovering from a minor surgery. But the day they brought potential buyers to tour what they called a soon-to-be-available charmer, their rehearsed speech died in their throats. They had no idea that while I was teaching quilting classes at the community center and tending my award-winning garden, I had also become a licensed real estate agent with enough legal knowledge to not only block their sale, but to expose their scheme to the entire family. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never imagined spending my golden years fighting for the right to remain in my own home. At 73, I had envisioned peaceful mornings in my garden, afternoons teaching quilting at the community center, and evenings on my wraparound porch watching the neighborhood children play, just as I had for decades. Instead, I found myself at the center of a family drama that tested not only my resilience, but my understanding of those I thought I knew best. My name is Dorothy Winters. My late husband Frank and I purchased our home on Maple Street in the small town of Riverdale in 1976, when we were newlyweds with more dreams than dollars. It was a modest two-bedroom bungalow then, with peeling paint and a yard full of weeds, but it was ours. Frank worked at the local paper mill, while I taught third grade at Riverdale Elementary. We weren't wealthy by any measure, but we were careful with our money and rich in determination. "This place has good bones," Frank said the day we moved in, running his hands along the worn but solid wood trim around the windows. "It just needs some love and patience." Love and patience we had in abundance, even when money was tight. That first summer, we scraped together enough to replace the roof, Frank doing most of the work himself with help from his brother Edward and a few friends from the mill. I learned to strip and refinish wood, transforming the dingy cabinets in the kitchen into gleaming oak showcases. We planted our first garden in the backyard, tomatoes, peppers, and zucchini that produced so abundantly we shared with half the neighborhood. Over the years, with Frank's carpentry skills and my design ideas, we transformed that humble starter home into something special. We added a second story when our daughter Sarah was born, built the wraparound porch that became the envy of the neighborhood, and planted the garden that would eventually win the Riverdale Horticultural Society's Best Residential Garden Award, 12 years running. Every inch of our home had been touched by our hands, shaped by our vision, infused with our love. "A house becomes a home through thousands of small decisions," Frank used to say, "each one a testament to what you value, what you're willing to work for." What we valued was a place where family gathered, where neighbors felt welcome, where memories could be created and cherished. The kitchen table where Sarah learned to read and later struggled through algebra homework. The backyard where we hosted 4th of July barbecues for 30 years running. The living room where our small church group met weekly for prayer and support during difficult times. Frank passed away 8 years ago, a sudden stroke while he was repairing Mrs. Henderson's fence next door. He was always helping neighbors with projects, refusing payment but never turning down a slice of pie or a glass of lemonade. "Community is built one good turn at a time," he would say, a philosophy that shaped our life on Maple Street. I still remember the day of his funeral, how our modest home overflowed with people from every corner of Riverdale. The mill workers who had retired alongside Frank, my former students, now grown with children of their own, neighbors past and present. The house embraced them all, just as Frank would have wanted, its walls seeming to expand to hold the community he had helped nurture over decades. After Frank died, many people assumed I would sell the house and move into something smaller, perhaps one of those senior living communities on the edge of town. "It's too much house for one person," they would say, not understanding that these walls held more than memories. They held my identity, my purpose, my connection to the life Frank and I had built together. Have you thought about what's next? Well-meaning friends would ask, their tone suggesting that widowhood at 65 necessarily meant downsizing, retreating, diminishing. This is what's next, I would answer, gesturing to the home around me. Frank may be gone, but our life's work is still here, and so am I. Instead of downsizing, I threw myself into maintaining and even improving our home. I took woodworking classes at the community college so I could keep up with the repairs Frank used to handle. I expanded the garden to include a vegetable patch that now supplies half the neighborhood with fresh produce in summer. I converted the spare bedroom into a quilting studio where I create the pieces that have become locally famous, selling at the town's artisan market to supplement my teacher's pension. What few people realized was that my dedication to maintaining our home went beyond emotional attachment. It was also practical. In a town like Riverdale, where housing costs had risen steadily over the years, I couldn't have afforded to buy a new place, even a smaller one, without taking on a mortgage at an age when such options are limited. Property taxes on our home were manageable thanks to senior exemptions, and years of careful upgrades meant maintenance costs were reasonable. Financially and emotionally, staying put made perfect sense. It also allowed me to remain at the heart of the community we had helped build, the young family across the street who relied on my after-school supervision of their twins. Mrs. Henderson next door, now 92, who needed daily check-ins and occasional grocery runs. The neighborhood children who gathered on my porch for homemade cookies and stories about old Riverdale when their parents needed a break. You're the neighborhood's living memory, Mabel Jenkins, my oldest friend and former town clerk, often told me. You remember who lived where, who feuded with whom, which houses were moved after the flood of '94. That kind of history matters. Our daughter Sarah lives 3 hours away in the city with her husband Tom and their 2 children. She's a corporate attorney with a demanding career that leaves little time for visits, though she calls faithfully every Sunday evening. I'm proud of her success, but sometimes wistful for the days when she lived closer. Her busy life means she can't check on me as often as she might like, a situation that my nephew Roger, Frank's brother's son, took upon himself to remedy. Roger had always been a frequent visitor to our home during his childhood. Edward lived just one town over, and whenever tensions rose in their household, which was often, given Edward's difficult marriage, Roger would bike the 5 miles to our place, arriving sweaty and sometimes tearful, knowing he'd find sanctuary with Uncle Frank and Aunt Dorothy. This house feels safe, he once told me when he was about 12, helping me roll out pie dough in the kitchen after a particularly bad fight at his home. Like nothing bad can happen here. We'd done our best to make that true for him, providing the stability his own home lacked. Frank taught him carpentry and fishing. I helped with homework and made sure he had someone to talk to about the challenges of adolescence. When he graduated high school and headed to state college, we attended the ceremony in Edward's stead, Edward having forgotten the date despite our reminders. Roger and his wife Diane moved to Riverdale 5 years ago when he took a position as branch manager at the local bank. Having family nearby again was initially a comfort. They would invite me for Sunday dinners, help with occasional heavy lifting around the house, and keep an eye on my place when I visited Sarah during the holidays. Roger had always expressed fondness for the house, calling it his second home growing up. I have more happy memories in this house than in the one I grew up in, he once told Diane in my presence, running his hand along the kitchen counter where he'd spent so many hours baking with me. Aunt Dorothy and Uncle Frank knew how to make a real home. The comment had warmed my heart at the time. Now, looking back, I wonder if it revealed something else, an envy or possessiveness I hadn't recognized. Shortly after their move to Riverdale, Roger and Diane purchased a home in Lakeside Estates, a new development on the outskirts of town. It was impressive. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. Very different from My comfortable but modest home on Maple Street. It's an investment, Roger explained during my first visit. Property values in this development are projected to increase 20% in the next 5 years. I nodded politely, though the home felt sterile to me. Too perfect, too untouched by life. No scuffs on the hardwood to mark where children had played. No slight unevenness in the bathroom tile to reminisce about the weekend Frank had installed it. No worn spot on the kitchen counter where decades of meal preparation had left their mark. Perhaps I should have recognized the shift in his attitude sooner. The concerned comments about my managing alone began about 2 years ago, around the time that housing prices in Riverdale started climbing due to an influx of commuters from the city seeking small-town charm with reasonable drive times. "Aunt Dorothy, this house is becoming a lot for you to handle," Roger would say, noticing a gutter that needed cleaning or a fence post that had come loose. "Have you thought about what's next?" "I'm handling it just fine," I would assure him, not mentioning that I'd already scheduled the handyman to take care of those issues, or that at 73, I was still perfectly capable of overseeing my own home maintenance. Diane was less subtle. "This neighborhood is really becoming desirable," she would remark, scrolling through real estate listings on her phone during visits. "The Johnsons down the street just sold for triple what they paid in the 90s. Triple. You're sitting on a gold mine, Dorothy." I would smile and change the subject. The house had never been an investment to me. It was home, the setting for a lifetime of joys and sorrows, the physical manifestation of the life Frank and I had built together. Its value couldn't be calculated in dollars. "You know, they're building those lovely senior apartments near the community center," Diane mentioned during one visit, her tone deliberately casual. "All one level, no maintenance required. And they have activities so you wouldn't be so isolated." "I'm hardly isolated," I replied, gesturing toward the calendar on my refrigerator filled with community engagements, volunteer commitments, and social activities. "And I prefer a home where I can garden and quilt and host my neighborhood children." "But it would be so much easier," she persisted. "No lawn to mow, no gutters to clean, no stairs to navigate as you get older." I didn't bother pointing out that I had hired a neighborhood teenager to mow the lawn years ago, that the gutters had been covered with guards after Frank's passing, or that we had deliberately renovated to include a bedroom and full bath on the main floor as we aged. These were practical solutions to practical problems, not reasons to abandon a perfectly good home. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't discover until much later, was that Roger and Diane's interest in my next chapter was far from altruistic. Their casual questions about my finances, their increasing insistence on helping with my paperwork, their offers to update my will with their connections at a law firm, all of it was leading somewhere I never imagined family could go. I did notice their interest intensify after Mrs. Henderson's son moved her to an assisted living facility following a fall. Her house, similar to mine in age and style, sold within a week for a price that raised eyebrows throughout the neighborhood. "Did you see how quickly the Henderson place went?" Diane asked during their next visit, her eyes gleaming with an enthusiasm that struck me as unseemly, given that the sale represented the end of Mrs. Henderson's independence. "And they say there were multiple offers above asking price." "Martha didn't want to leave," I said quietly. "Her son made that decision. For her after the fall." "Well, it was probably for the best," Diane replied dismissively. "She couldn't have managed alone much longer at her age." The comment chilled me slightly, containing as it did the unspoken assumption that advancing age necessarily meant diminished capacity. I had seen it happen with other friends, well-meaning family members making decisions for their own good that ignored decades of demonstrated competence and clear-stated preferences. Martha was still lucid and mobile, I pointed out. She just needed more support at home, which the community was providing until her son stepped in. "Family knows best," Roger interjected with a finality that ended the discussion, but lingered in my mind long afterward. During this period, I had been quietly taking steps to protect my independence that neither Roger nor Diane knew about. After witnessing several elderly friends lose control of their lives to well-meaning but overreaching family members, I had decided to educate myself about my rights and options. It began with a conversation with Mabel, who had witnessed similar scenarios during her 30 years as town clerk. "The problem is that most seniors don't know their legal rights until it's too late," she told me over coffee one morning. "By the time they realize what's happening, decisions have been made, papers have been signed, and it's an uphill battle to regain control." "What would you recommend?" I asked, thinking not of myself specifically, but of our aging community in general. She didn't hesitate. "First, make sure your legal affairs are in order with professionals who represent your interests, not your family's. Second, stay engaged with the community so there are witnesses to your continued competence. And third," she paused, her expression serious, "consider getting your real estate license." The suggestion caught me by surprise. "My real estate license? Mabel, I'm 73. I'm not looking to start a new career." She laughed. "Not as a career, Dorothy. As protection. Michigan has some peculiar laws about property transfers and capacity. Real estate agents have a different level of presumed competence when it comes to property matters. It can be a shield if someone tries to claim you're not capable of managing your affairs, particularly your home." The idea was intriguing. I had always enjoyed learning new things, and the prospect of a course of study that would both engage my mind and potentially protect my independence was appealing. Within a week, I had enrolled in the required classes at the community college, the same place where I took my woodworking course. For 6 months, I studied property law, contracts, ethics, and market analysis. At 73, I was by far the oldest student in the class, but my experience as a teacher had made me a disciplined learner, and my decades of home ownership provided practical context for the material. When I passed the state licensing exam, with a score of 94%, my instructor suggested I consider actually practicing in the field. "You have a natural talent for this," he told me. "Your combination of life experience and people skills would make you an excellent agent, especially for older clients navigating difficult transitions." I thanked him but explained that my interest was primarily educational. I didn't mention my underlying motivation, the growing sense that I might need this knowledge sooner than I had anticipated. I kept my licensing achievement quiet, not out of secrecy, but because it simply didn't come up in conversation. Roger and Diane were busy with their own lives, and our interactions had become less frequent and more perfunctory over time. Sarah knew. I had mentioned it during one of our Sunday calls, but she saw it as just another of her mother's continuous education efforts, like the Master Gardener certification I had earned 5 years earlier, or the advanced quilting techniques I had studied in workshops across the state. "Always learning something new," she had said with affectionate pride. "You put my continuing education credits to shame, Mom." The catalyst for everything that followed was a scheduled knee replacement, a routine procedure to address years of wear and tear from gardening and standing in classrooms. Nothing serious, nothing life-threatening, simply a necessary maintenance of an aging body, not unlike the occasional need to replace worn shingles on a beloved home. When I mentioned the upcoming surgery during a rare dinner at Roger and Diane's, their reaction was immediate and oddly intense. "You'll need somewhere to recover," Diane insisted, setting down her fork with a decisiveness that brooked no argument. "Somewhere without stairs with people to help you. You'll stay with us. Of course." Her insistence struck me as excessive. My bedroom and full bath were on the main floor, a deliberate renovation Frank and I had made as we got older. I had already arranged for a home health aide to visit during the first week post-surgery, and my neighbors had organized a meal train to ensure I would have proper nutrition during recovery. "Riverdale takes care of its own." "That's very kind," I told her. "But I've made arrangements to recover at home. Sarah is taking a week off to help with the initial transition, and after that, I'll have plenty of support." Sarah? Diane's tone was dismissive. She'll fly in, fuss around for a few days, then rush back to her important job and leave you struggling. No, you need family who are here, who understand what's best for you at this stage of life. That phrase, at this stage of life, should have been my warning. It carried assumptions about diminished capacity, about decisions that should be taken out of my hands, about a woman in her 70s being less capable of directing her own life than a woman in her 40s or a man in his 50s. Instead, I accepted it as well-intentioned concern, perhaps a bit overbearing but coming from a place of care. I appreciate your concern, I said firmly, but I'm comfortable with the plans I've made. Diane pressed her lips together in that way she had, when dissatisfied but unwilling to show it openly. Well, if you change your mind, our guest room is always available. I thanked her again and thought the matter settled. The surgery was scheduled for May 15th, with Sarah arriving the day before to help prepare the house for my recovery period. Everything was arranged, every contingency considered. What I didn't couldn't have imagined, was that Roger and Diane had made arrangements of their own. Arrangements that had nothing to do with my welfare and everything to do with the gold mine they believed I was sitting on. The surgery went smoothly. I spent 2 nights in the hospital, with Sarah by my side throughout. She had transformed my living room into a recovery station with everything I might need within reach: books, water, medications, phone, laptop, even the television remote. Controlled by a smartphone app she installed for me. My quilting friend Mabel had organized the neighbors into shifts, ensuring someone would check on me morning and afternoon for the first month. Mom, are you sure you don't want me to stay longer? Sarah asked the night before she was scheduled to return to the city. I can work remotely for another week if you need me. Absolutely not, I insisted. Your big case is coming up and I'm fine. The pain is manageable, I'm moving better each day, and I have an army of Riverdale's finest looking after me. Go be brilliant in court. She kissed my forehead, just as I had done countless times during her childhood illnesses. Call me for anything, big or small. Promise? Promise, I assured her, touched by the role reversal but confident in my recovery plan. Sarah left the next morning, and my carefully arranged support system functioned beautifully. Mabel brought lunch and checked my bandages. Mrs. Peterson, across the street, delivered a casserole and stayed for a chat in the afternoon. The home health aide visited to assist with exercises prescribed by the physical therapist. Roger and Diane called but didn't visit, which struck me as odd given their previous insistence on being involved in my recovery. We don't want to tire you with too many visitors, Roger explained when I mentioned their absence. We'll check in next week when you're stronger. The explanation seemed reasonable, though not entirely consistent with their earlier concern. Still, I was grateful for the space to recover at my own pace, in my own home, surrounded by the familiar comforts that made the pain and limited mobility more bearable. 6 days after surgery, I was surprised by an unexpected ring of the doorbell during what was usually a quiet afternoon hour. Using my walker, which I hated but obediently used to prevent falls, I made my slow way to the front door. Through the sidelight window, I could see Roger standing on my porch. Beside him stood a couple I didn't recognize, the woman smartly dressed in a blazer despite the May heat, the man carrying what looked like a portfolio under his arm. Behind them, I glimpsed Diane waiting by a luxury SUV parked in my driveway. Curious, but not yet alarmed, I opened the door. Aunt Dorothy. Roger's surprise seemed excessive, given that he was the one visiting my home unannounced. What are you doing up and around? Answering my door, I replied with mild confusion. Is everything all right? His gaze darted to the strangers, then back to me. We thought you were resting. Diane said she called earlier and got no answer. I had silenced my phone during my afternoon nap, a new habit during recovery, but that didn't explain why they had brought strangers to my home without warning. Roger, I said directly, Who are these people? The woman stepped forward with a practiced smile. Mrs. Winters, I'm Heather Blackwell from Panorama Realty. This is my associate, Jim Cortez. Your nephew mentioned you might be interested in exploring options for your property, and we were in the neighborhood, so— My property? I interrupted, my confusion giving way to the first stirrings of alarm. I'm not interested in exploring options for my home. Roger's laugh was too loud, too forced. Aunt Dorothy, remember our discussions? About downsizing to something more manageable? After the surgery, you mentioned being concerned about maintaining the house. I had said no such thing. Not after surgery, not ever. There must be a misunderstanding, I said firmly, looking directly at the realtors. I have no intention of selling my home. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm recovering from surgery and need to rest. The woman, Heather, exchanged a glance with Roger. Perhaps we caught you at a bad time. Your nephew mentioned you've been experiencing some confusion since the medication. I am not confused, I stated clearly, anger beginning to replace confusion. And I would appreciate it if all of you would leave now. Jim, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. Ma'am, we understand this is a difficult transition to consider. Many of our older clients feel the same way initially, but once they see the numbers— He began opening his portfolio, revealing what looked like a market analysis of my property. At that moment, two things became crystal clear. First, this was not a casual visit, but a planned showing of my home to real estate agents. Second, Roger had been discussing my supposed diminished capacity and creating a narrative of confusion that didn't exist. Roger, I said, my voice steady despite the shock coursing through me. Please take these people and leave my property immediately. We will discuss this later, privately. His expression hardened momentarily before he forced another smile. Of course, Aunt Dorothy. You're tired. We should have called ahead. Let's reschedule when you're feeling more yourself. More myself. As if my rejection of their presumption was a symptom of illness rather than a rational response to an outrageous situation. I closed the door as they retreated, then made my slow way to the window to ensure they actually left. Through the curtains, I watched Roger gesture animatedly to Diane, who appeared agitated in response. The realtors stood by their separate car, Heather speaking on her phone while Jim consulted something on a tablet. What I had just experienced seemed impossible. Family members attempting to sell my home without my knowledge or consent, using my temporary physical vulnerability as an opportunity. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The question now was, how far had this gone, and what else didn't I know? I made my way to the phone and called the one person who would help me navigate this betrayal with both emotional support and practical advice. My oldest friend, Mabel Jenkins, who had been Riverdale's town clerk for 30 years before retirement, and knew more about property law and local regulations than anyone else in our community. Mabel, I said when she answered, my voice finally betraying the tremor of shock I'd been suppressing. I need your help. Something's happening with Roger and my house, and I think I may need more than just a friend right now. I might need a lawyer. Little did Roger and Diane know that their carefully orchestrated plan was about to encounter an obstacle they never anticipated. A 73-year-old woman who was far from ready to be marginalized, manipulated, or moved out of the home. She had earned through decades of love and labor. Their mistake wasn't just ethical or moral. It was strategic. They had severely underestimated who they were dealing with, and they were about to discover just how costly that miscalculation would be. Mabel arrived at my home 20 minutes after my call, her practical sedan pulling into the driveway just as the sun was beginning to set. I watched from the window as she gathered several folders from her passenger seat. Typical Mabel, already prepared with research and resources before I'd even explained the full situation. You look better than I expected for someone who had knee surgery last week, she remarked as I let her in, her sharp eyes taking in my walker and the slight wince I couldn't quite hide when I shifted my weight. The surgery went well. It's the family situation that's causing the real pain, I replied, leading her to the living room where I had set out tea and the lemon cookies she had always favored. For the next half hour, I detailed everything. The gradual escalation of Roger and Diane's comments about my house being too much for me, their insistence that I recover from surgery at their home, and finally, the unannounced visit with realtors who clearly believed they had authorization to begin the selling process. Mabel listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly grave. When I finished, she set down her teacup with a decisive click against the saucer. "This is more common than you'd think," she said, confirming my worst fears. "I saw it regularly during my years at town hall. Family members attempting to make decisions about an elder's property without proper authorization, often using a temporary health issue as leverage. But I never signed anything," I insisted. "I've never indicated any desire to sell or given Roger power to act on my behalf." "That's good," Mabel nodded. "However, we need to determine how far this has progressed. The fact that they brought realtors for what appeared to be a formal assessment suggests they may have taken steps beyond mere discussion." She opened one of her folders, revealing a legal pad filled with her meticulous handwriting. "I've outlined several immediate actions we should take. First, we need to verify your property records at the county office to ensure no documents have been filed without your knowledge." "Is that even possible?" I asked, horrified at the thought. "Unfortunately, yes. There have been cases of fraudulent transfers, especially between family members when one party has access to personal documents." She hesitated before continuing. "Dorothy, when was the last time you checked your important papers? Your deed? Your will? Your financial information?" The question sent a chill through me. "I kept my essential documents in a fireproof box in my bedroom closet, a location Roger knew about from the days following Frank's death, when he had helped me organize financial matters. I hadn't had reason to check those papers in months." "Should look at them right now," I said, already reaching for my walker. "Let me," Mabel offered, standing. "Where are they kept?" I directed her to the bedroom closet and described the box and its combination lock. While she was gone, I tried to steady my racing thoughts. Surely Roger wouldn't have gone so far as to tamper with my legal documents? Despite his recent behavior, he was still the boy who had found sanctuary in our home, who had learned carpentry at Frank's side, who had always expressed gratitude for our role in his life. When Mabel returned carrying the fireproof box, her expression told me everything before she spoke a word. "It's been disturbed," she said, setting the box on the coffee table between us. "Some papers are out of order, and there are blank spots in your document folders where items should be." With growing alarm, we inventoried the contents. My husband's death certificate was there, as were our marriage license and my birth certificate. But the property deed was missing, as was a copy of my will and the power of attorney document I had established naming Sarah, not Roger, as my healthcare proxy. "This is beyond concerning," Mabel said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "We need to move quickly. Fortunately, your real estate license gives us an advantage they wouldn't have anticipated." She was right. My license, earned for educational purposes rather than professional practice, established a legal presumption of competence in property, matters that would be difficult to overcome, even with claims of medication-induced confusion or age-related decline. "What's our first step?" I asked. Professional focus replacing the initial shock and hurt. "We begin with the county records." "Office," Mabel decided. "First thing tomorrow morning, we'll verify the current status of your deed and ensure no transfers or liens have been filed. Then we'll visit your attorney to create new, secure copies of your will and power of attorney documents with explicit language revoking any previous versions." "And what about Roger and Diane?" I asked, the pain of their betrayal settling into something harder, more resolute. "Do I confront them directly?" Mabel considered this carefully. "Not yet. Information is our advantage right now. If they don't, Know we're aware of the full extent of their actions. We have time to secure your position before they can create additional complications. It was sound advice, aligned with the strategic thinking I had developed during decades of teaching and homemaking, both roles that required careful planning and the ability to manage difficult situations with calm authority. You're right, I agreed. We gather information first, then act from a position of strength. Exactly. Mabel smiled, a hint of the formidable town clerk who had kept Riverdale's records and officials in perfect order for 30 years. And speaking of information, there's one more thing we should check tonight. She pulled out her tablet. Mabel had embraced technology with an enthusiasm that put many younger residents to shame, and opened a real estate listing website. Let's see if they've gone so far as to list your property, even preliminarily, she explained, typing in my address. Nothing appeared under my street address, which provided momentary relief until Mabel tried a different search parameter. Coming. Soon listings in Riverdale, and there it was, not yet publicly listed but visible in a section for agent previews and advance notifications. Charming historic home in desirable Maple Street neighborhood. Original features with modern updates. Ideal for renovation or investment opportunity. Coming to market June 2023. No address was listed, but the description matched my home perfectly, right down to the award-winning perennial gardens, mentioned in the amenities section. The listing agent was Heather Blackwell, the same woman who had stood on my porch that afternoon. They've already started the process, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the betrayal evidenced on the screen before us. They're planning to list my home next month without my consent. This is actually helpful evidence, Mabel pointed out, her practical nature focusing on strategy rather than outrage. It demonstrates clear intent and preparation, which will strengthen our position when we do take action. She was right, of course. The premature listing was not just an ethical violation, but potentially a legal one as well, something that would be of particular interest to the Real Estate Commission that had granted me my license less than a year earlier. We need to document everything, I decided. Create a timeline of Roger and Diane's comments and actions leading up to this, preserve any texts or emails that show their increasing focus on my property, and gather witness statements from neighbors who can attest to my ongoing independence and home maintenance. Mabel looked at me with approval. You're thinking like the educator you've always been, methodical, evidence-based, thorough. This is exactly the approach we need. We spent the next several hours creating a comprehensive documentation plan. Mabel would handle the county record search and coordinate with my attorney, while I would compile a detailed history of my interactions with Roger and Diane over the past year, focusing on any discussions related to my house or my independent living situation. By the time Mabel left that evening, we had a clear strategy and timeline. Tomorrow would be devoted to information gathering and legal reinforcement. The day after, if all went as planned, we would begin the counteroffensive. Try to rest, Mabel advised as she prepared to leave. Your recovery is still important, and we'll need you at full strength for what's ahead. I promised to follow my post-surgery care instructions, but sleep proved elusive that night. The knowledge that family members, people I had loved and trusted, had systematically planned to dispose of my home without my consent, left a wound far deeper than the surgical incision on my knee. What troubled me most wasn't just the potential financial loss or even the disruption to my life, but the fundamental disrespect their actions represented. They had decided that my preferences, my autonomy, my lifetime of demonstrated competence were irrelevant, that they knew better what should happen to the home I had built with Frank, maintained through widowhood, and transformed into a cornerstone of our neighborhood community. Such disregard cut to the heart of fears many aging individuals face. The fear of being dismissed, of having agency stripped away, of being treated as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. I had seen it happen to friends and never imagined I would face the same painful diminishment, especially from family. By morning, however, the hurt had crystallized into resolve. This was not just about keeping my home, though that remained non-negotiable. It was about establishing a precedent, for myself and for others who might face similar situations. It was about demonstrating that age did not equal incapacity, that the right to self-determination didn't expire at some arbitrary birthday. With that clarity of purpose, I began the day with renewed energy despite the discomfort in my healing knee. Following my physical therapist's instructions, I performed the prescribed exercises before settling at the kitchen table with my laptop and phone, ready to compile the documentation we had planned. I started with a chronological list of every comment Roger and Diane had made about my home, my independence, or my future living arrangements over the past 2 years. The pattern, when laid out sequentially, was striking. A gradual escalation from occasional suggestions about easier living options to increasingly direct pressure to consider selling, particularly after neighborhood property values began to rise dramatically. Next, I searched my email and text messages for any written communications that would support this timeline. There weren't many. Roger and Diane preferred to have these conversations in person, but what existed was telling. A text from Roger after Mrs. Henderson moved out. Her house sold for $75,000 over asking. Something to think about. An email from Diane forwarding information about senior apartments, just in case you ever want to simplify your life. Small things. In isolation, but part of a larger pattern when viewed collectively. By mid-morning, Mabel called with news from the county records office. "Your deed is still securely in your name," she reported, the relief evident in her voice. "No transfers, no quitclaim actions, no liens or encumbrances have been filed." "That's something, at least," I said, making a note in my growing documentation file. "There's more," Mabel continued. "I checked with the Real Estate Commission, and that coming soon listing we found is problematic from a licensing perspective. Without a signed listing agreement from the legal property owner, you, the agent, is violating professional standards by creating even a preview listing." This was useful leverage. So Heather Blackwell has potentially jeopardized her professional standing by working with Roger on this? Precisely, Mabel confirmed, which gives us another angle to pursue when we're ready to act. I've already scheduled an appointment with Harold Bennett at his law office for tomorrow morning. He's reviewed your situation and agrees we need to move quickly. Harold Bennett had been Riverdale's most respected attorney for 4 decades. He had handled Frank's will and the subsequent estate matters, and though I hadn't needed his services in recent years, I trusted his judgment implicitly. "Perfect," I agreed. I should have a complete documentation package ready by then. After ending the call with Mabel, I continued my information gathering, expanding to include photographs of my home's current condition, evidence of my continued ability to maintain the property properly, and a list of community activities that demonstrated my ongoing engagement and capacity. I was in the midst of this work when my phone rang again,